Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're representing. Now, let's get into it. Julian Vance measured his life in panes of glass. There was the seamless wall of his penthouse, 100 stories above the city, that separated him from the noise and the grit of the world below. There was the screen of his tablet displaying stock tickers and corporate reports in cold, emotionless light. And there was the reflection in both. The ghost of a man seated in a $12,000 carbon fiber wheelchair, a man who commanded a global empire, but could not command his own legs to stand. The city sprawled beneath him, a glittering tapestry of lives he could influence with a single phone call. Yet he remained utterly, profoundly alone. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the screech of tires on a rain-slicked road had stolen everything. The accident had taken his wife, Ilara, her vibrant life extinguished in an instant. It had taken the use of his body from the waist down, leaving him a prisoner in a fortress of his own wealth. Grief had long ago cooled into a hard, polished bitterness. He ran his company with ruthless efficiency, his mind a sharpened weapon, because it was the only part of him that still worked flawlessly. His heart was a locked room, the key long lost. His days were a sterile routine, managed by a team of assistants and a private physical therapist who spoke in tones of forced optimism. This afternoon, however, the routine was broken. A rare public appearance. A press event for a new wing of a downtown children's hospital his company had funded. He hated these things, the sympathetic glances, the careful way people navigated around his chair, the cloying smell of manufactured goodwill. He sat on the dais, a marble statue in a tailored suit, his face an unreadable mask, as speeches droned on. When it was over, his security detail, a large man named Marcus, began clearing a path through the throng of reporters and patrons. They moved through the grand lobby, a river of polite society parting for the paralyzed millionaire. It was then that he saw her, a small girl no older than 5 or 6, standing near a potted ficus tree, half hidden. She was holding a small foil-wrapped parcel, and her eyes, wide and serious, were fixed on him. It wasn't just her gaze that stopped him, it was her face. The gentle curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, the way a single curl escaped her tightly braided hair to rest on her forehead. It was like looking at a miniature ghost. It was Ilara's face. Julian's breath hitched. A tremor, not of muscle but of memory, ran through him. He raised a hand, a gesture for Marcus to halt. The big man stopped instantly, placing himself between Julian and the crowd, creating a small pocket of stillness. The little girl took a hesitant step forward, then another. She moved with a strange, solemn purpose, clutching her package. She walked right up to his wheelchair, her head barely reaching the armrest. Her clothes were clean but worn, a faded pink jacket over a simple dress. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice small but clear, without a trace of fear. Julian found he couldn't speak. He could broker billion-dollar deals without flinching, but this child, this echo of his lost love, had stolen his voice. He simply stared, his mind racing. Who was she? Why was she here? The girl held up her foil-wrapped offering. "Are you the man from the Vance building?" He managed a nod, his throat tight. "My mama says you're very rich," she continued matter-of-factly. "She says you probably have a lot of leftovers. Fancy leftovers." Orca, Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. Leftovers? What was she talking about? "I'd like to make a trade," the girl said, her expression earnest. "Your leftovers for a cure." The words hung in the air, absurd and surreal. A cure. The world's best doctors, specialists from 3 continents, had all given him the same verdict. Permanent. Irreversible. The word cure was a cruel joke, a fantasy he had banished from his thoughts years ago. And this child was offering it to him in exchange for table scraps. An involuntary sound escaped him. It was a dry, rasping thing, halfway between a cough and a laugh. It was the first time he had laughed in years, and it was a sound devoid of all joy. It was the sound of broken things. "A cure?" he said, his voice rough with disuse. "What do you know about cures, little girl?" She didn't flinch at his harsh tone. "Not for your legs," she said, her wisdom startling. She pointed a tiny finger at his chest. "For in there. My mama says sometimes the biggest sickness is the one you can't see. It's a sad sickness." She pushed the foil parcel onto his lap. "This is a down payment. It's a brownie. My mama makes the best ones. You can have it. Just think about my offer." Before he could respond, a woman rushed forward, her face a mask of panic. "Maya, oh my goodness, I am so sorry, sir. So sorry." She slipped away from me for just a second. "Ah!" The woman's face was etched with exhaustion, but she held herself with a fierce, protective pride. She gently took the girl Maya by the hand. Julian looked from the woman to the child and back again. There was no resemblance between them. The woman was handsome, with warm brown skin and tired eyes. But the girl was Alara. "Maya, you do not bother people like this," the woman whispered, her voice a mixture of embarrassment and stern affection. "Come on." She started to lead the child away. "Wait!" Julian called out. The woman stopped, turning back with a wary expression, her arm tightening around her daughter. Julian looked down at the small, lumpy parcel in his lap. Then he looked back at the girl, Maya, who was watching him with those impossibly familiar eyes. The cynical, logical part of his brain screamed that it was a coincidence, a trick of light and grief. But another part, a part he thought had died in the wreckage on that rainy night, felt a flicker of something else, a profound and terrifying intrigue. "What is your name?" he asked the woman, his voice regaining its usual tone of command. "Lena," she answered, her chin lifting slightly, as if bracing for a dismissal. "Lena Robotics." "And the girl? Maya?" "Yes." He looked at Maya one last time. The laugh had died in his throat, replaced by a cold knot of confusion. The world, which had been so predictably gray and orderly, had suddenly fractured, and through the crack a ghost had stepped in, offering a cure for a sickness he hadn't dared to name. He watched them disappear into the crowd, leaving him alone in his chair with a warm brownie and a question that would tear his carefully constructed world apart. The brownie sat on the polished obsidian of his desk, a humble intruder in a world of chrome and steel. Julian hadn't touched it. He hadn't touched his dinner, either. He stared out the window at the city lights, a river of diamonds that offered no warmth. The girl's face was superimposed over the view, her serious eyes, her uncanny resemblance to Alara. It was impossible, a fluke. He and Alara had tried for a child. They had talked to doctors, endured tests, and faced the quiet heartbreak of failure month after month. There was no child. He knew that with the same certainty that he knew the sun would rise. And yet, he wheeled himself over to a recessed panel in the wall. With a soft click, it slid open to reveal a safe. Inside, among stock certificates and property deeds, was a single leather-bound photo album. He hadn't opened it in years. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it out and placed it on his desk. He opened it to the first page, a picture of Alara, taken on their honeymoon. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a stray curl falling across her forehead in the exact same way as the little girl's. He flipped through the pages, his chest aching. Her smile, the tilt of her head, the shape of her eyes. It was all there, a perfect blueprint for the face of the child named Maya. Coincidence was no longer a sufficient explanation. The next morning he made a call, not to his board of directors or his acquisitions team, but to a man named Arthur Davies. Davies was a private investigator, a relic from another era. He was discreet, thorough, and utterly devoid of sentimentality, qualities Julian valued above all others. "I need you to find someone for me," Julian said, his voice flat. "A woman named Lena Robotics and her daughter, Maya. No last name for the mother. They were at the Children's Hospital charity event yesterday afternoon." "Objective?" Davies' voice was dry as dust over the phone. "Information, everything you can find. Where they live, where they work, who they are. And Davies, be invisible. I don't want them to know they're being looked at. This is a matter of extreme sensitivity." "Understood, Mr. Vance." For the next 48 hours, Julian existed in a state of suspended animation. He went through the motions of his work, his mind a razor-sharp tool in virtual meetings. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He was a ghost, haunting his own life, waiting. The brownie remained on his desk, a silent, taunting presence. On the third day, Davies's report arrived. It was a slim digital file, encrypted and sterile. Julian opened it, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The report was concise. Lena Robotics, age 32. No last name on record, she seemed to live almost entirely off the grid. Worked as a nurse's aide at a palliative care facility in a struggling neighborhood across town. Long hours, low pay. Lived in a small second-floor apartment in a pre-war building with peeling paint and a fire escape latticed with rust. The child, Maya, was 5 years old, enrolled in a local public kindergarten. No father listed on any official documents. Julian scrolled through the attached photos. They were taken from a distance, grainy and voyeuristic. Lena walking Maya to school, her hand held tight. Maya on a playground swing, her face alight with joy. In one photo, she was sitting on the apartment's front stoop, carefully drawing on the pavement with a piece of chalk. Even in the low-resolution image, the resemblance to Ilara was staggering. It was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He spent hours studying the images, the details of their humble life. The worn patches on Maya's backpack, the careful way Lena counted her change at a corner store. A strange and unfamiliar emotion began to stir within him, something beyond mere curiosity. It was a deep, unsettling ache. He saw their struggle, their quiet dignity, and felt a profound sense of connection. It was illogical. He didn't know these people. That evening, he instructed his driver to take him to their neighborhood. He didn't know why. It was an impulse, a deviation from the rigid control he exerted over his life. They parked across the street from the brick apartment building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that made the shabby street look almost beautiful. From the tinted window of his custom van, he watched. He saw Lena come home, her shoulders slumped with the weariness of a long day. A few minutes later, a school bus rumbled to a stop at the corner, and Maya hopped down the steps, her backpack bouncing. She ran into her mother's arms, and Lena's entire posture changed. Her exhaustion seemed to melt away as she hugged the child, burying her face in her hair. Julian watched the simple, profound display of love, and the walls of his penthouse felt 1,000,000 miles away. He was a spectator, a phantom looking in on a life of warmth and connection he had forgotten could exist. His wealth, his power, the entire Vance empire, it all felt like a pile of cold ash compared to that one simple hug. He had built a monument to his success, and inside he was starving. He stayed there for an hour, watching the warm light come on in their second-floor window, a small golden square against the encroaching dark. He thought of the girl's words, "A sickness you can't see." He had laughed at her. Now, sitting in the dark, a silent observer of a life he had no part in, the laughter felt like a distant echo from a fool's throat. He was beginning to understand that the child hadn't been wrong. He was sick. He was just the last one to know. The next report from Davies contained the detail that cracked the foundation of Julian's world. It was buried in a mundane background check on Lena, a single-line item that Davies himself had likely dismissed as irrelevant. It was a record of Ilara's volunteer activities from the last year of her life. Julian had believed he knew everything about his wife's final months. He thought she had spent her time between gallery openings and charity galas, the polished functions of their social class. But the report told a different story. Twice a week, every week, for 6 months leading up to the accident, Ilara had been volunteering, not at a museum or a symphony, but at a small, underfunded community health clinic. A clinic located 3 blocks from the apartment building where Lena and Maya now lived. His blood ran cold. He zoomed in on the dates. The timeline was a perfect, horrifying fit. Ilara had been there, in that neighborhood. His mind, trained to see patterns and connections, began to work furiously. Why would Ilara, his Ilara, who moved in circles of immense privilege, spend her time in one of a city's most neglected corners? And why had she never told him? It felt like a betrayal, a secret life he had been oblivious to. He had been so consumed with his work, with building the empire he thought she wanted, that he had missed this. He had missed a fundamental part of his own wife. The memory of her was no longer a perfect, static portrait. It was now a mystery. The questions were a torrent, and they all led back to the child, a child who looked exactly like his dead wife, living in the same neighborhood where that wife had kept a secret life. Coincidence was a statistical improbability. This was something else. This was a thread deliberately left for him to find, or deliberately hidden. He knew he could no longer watch from a distance. He needed to get closer. He needed to hear their voices, to look into their eyes, to search for the truth himself. But he couldn't simply appear on their doorstep. A man like him arriving unannounced would be an earthquake in their small world. He needed a pretext, a key to open the door without breaking it down. The community clinic from the report became his key. He spent a day orchestrating it. Calls were made. His foundation, a behemoth of philanthropic giving, was mobilized. A new grant initiative was announced. The Ilara Vance Memorial Fund for Community Health. Its first recipient would be the very clinic where she had volunteered. He would present the check himself. It was a massive, overblown gesture, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But it was the only way he knew. It was a corporate maneuver for a deeply personal mission. He arranged for the clinic's director to invite key community members to the small ceremony. He made a special request, passed down through 3 layers of assistants so it would seem impersonal. He wanted to meet some of the families the clinic served. He specifically asked that the nurse's aide from the palliative care facility, a woman named Lena, who was a known figure in the community, be invited. The day of the event was overcast, the gray sky mirroring the turmoil in his soul. The clinic was small, smelling of antiseptic and hope. It was a world away from the gleaming private hospitals he was used to. He saw Lena and Maya standing near the back of the small, crowded room. Lena looked deeply uncomfortable, her arms crossed over her chest, a lioness forced into a cage. Maya stood beside her, quiet and observant, her eyes taking everything in. After he gave a short, sterile speech and presented the oversized check, he navigated his chair through the well-wishers, his gaze locked on Lena. As he approached, she stiffened, her hand instinctively finding Maya's shoulder. "Ms. Robotics," Julian said, his voice even, "thank you for coming." "The director insisted," she replied, her tone clipped. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I was hoping to thank you personally," Julian continued, ignoring her coldness. "My investigator, my team, tells me you do important work in this community, and your daughter." He paused, turning his attention to the child. "Hello, Maya." Maya looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't eat your brownie." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. For the second time, the child disarmed him completely. I was saving it," he lied, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. Lena's posture became even more rigid. "Maya, we should go. Thank you for the donation, Mr. Vance." "Please," Julian said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I wanted to ask you something about my wife, Alara." At the mention of the name, Lena froze. Her eyes, for the first time, snapped to his. He saw a flash of something in their depths. Fear, recognition, a deep and hidden sorrow. It was the confirmation he needed. She knew. She had known all along. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She volunteered here," Julian pressed gently, keeping his voice low so only she could hear. "Twice a week, for months. I never knew. I thought perhaps you might have met her." Lena's face was a locked door. "This was a long time ago. I meet a lot of people." She was lying. He could see it in the tense line of her jaw, the way she refused to look at him. She looked a lot like your daughter, Julian said, the words falling like stones into the space between them. A flicker of pure panic crossed Lena's face before she masked it. "We have to go," she said, her voice strained. She pulled Maya closer, turning to leave. But Maya wasn't ready to go. She tugged free from her mother's grasp and took a step toward Julian. She reached out a small hand and, with surprising gentleness, touched the armrest of his wheelchair. "Your house is too quiet," she said softly. "That's part of the sickness. Sadness needs noise to get out." Julian stared at her, mesmerized. It was as if Alara herself were speaking through this child, telling him a truth he had been too blind to see. He looked up at Lena, whose eyes were now wide with unshed tears. The wall of her denial was crumbling. He knew, in that moment, with a certainty that transcended logic and demanded proof, that this was no coincidence. This child was a part of him. The realization didn't feel like a victory. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the world he knew falling away into dust behind him. The fragile truce established at the clinic dissolved into a tense silence over the next week. Julian knew he had pushed too hard, that Lena was now in full retreat. He had her phone number from Davies's report, but he didn't call. What would he say? "I think you're hiding my daughter?" The accusation was monstrous, insane. He needed more than a resemblance, and a secret volunteer log. He needed undeniable proof. His mind, accustomed to solving complex logistical problems, settled on a new, deeply uncomfortable strategy. He needed to get close to Maya again, but not through Lena. He needed a neutral ground. Davies's report had mentioned her school, the playground where she played every day after classes let out. The plan felt ghoulish, the act of a stalker, yet the gravitational pull of the mystery was too strong to resist. One afternoon, he had his driver park the van near the school playground, partially concealed by a large oak tree. From this vantage point, he could see the metal slide, the swings, the gaggle of children bursting from the school doors like a flock of starlings. He saw Maya immediately. She was sitting alone on a bench, away from the other children, carefully tending to a doll with yarn hair and a button eye. It was old and clearly beloved. As he watched, a group of bigger kids ran past, and one of them, a boy with a cruel smirk, deliberately knocked the doll from her hands. It fell to the asphalt with a sickening crack. The doll's porcelain head, already fragile with age, split in two. Maya didn't cry. She simply knelt and picked up the broken pieces, her small shoulders slumping. Julian felt a surge of white-hot rage, an emotion so fierce and protective it shocked him. He wanted to roll his chair out of the van, to shout at the boy, to do something. But he was trapped, a powerless observer. The feeling of helplessness was horribly familiar, the same impotence he felt every morning when he looked at his own useless legs. But he wasn't entirely powerless. His mind was his weapon. He took a high-resolution photo of the doll with his phone, zooming in on the broken pieces. That night, he set his global network of researchers not on a corporate acquisition, but on a new target, identifying and locating a vintage doll with yarn hair and a specific dress pattern. Within hours, he had an answer. It was a Willow Creek doll. Manufactured for a short period in the late 1980s, they were rare, but not impossible to find. By morning, he had located one in perfect condition from a collector in another country. He paid an astronomical sum for it, along with expedited international shipping that cost more than most people's cars. 2 days later, the doll arrived. It was perfect, a pristine copy of the one he had seen broken. Now came the most difficult part of the plan. He needed to obtain something of Maya's, something for a DNA test. The thought made him feel sick with guilt, a profound violation of trust, but the need to know was a fire in his gut. He sent Marcus, his large stoic security guard, on the most unusual mission of his career. Marcus, dressed in a simple maintenance uniform, went to the playground after school. He approached Maya, who was sitting on the same bench, holding the two halves of her doll's head. "Excuse me, little miss," Marcus said, his deep voice gentle. "I found this. I think maybe you dropped it." He held out the new doll. Maya's eyes widened. She looked from the new doll to her broken one and back again. "It's fixed," she whispered in pure awe. "Looks like it," Marcus said with a small smile. She reached out and took the doll, her hands tracing its perfect porcelain face. She looked up at Marcus with such gratitude that the big man seemed to almost blush. While she was distracted, Marcus's other hand, quick and precise, plucked a single stray hair from the collar of her jacket, a hair she had likely shed during the day. He palmed it, slipped it into a small evidence baggie in his pocket, and retreated. The next morning, the hair, along with a sample of Julian's own blood drawn by his private nurse, was sent via medical courier to the most advanced genetics lab in the country. The lab served billionaires and governments. Their discretion was absolute. The wait was agony. For 72 hours, Julian was a caged animal. He snapped at his assistants, ignored his board, and spent hours staring at the pristine doll he had bought, now sitting on his desk next to the foil-wrapped brownie. One was a symbol of his power, the other a symbol of his poverty of spirit. The email arrived at 3:17 a.m. He was awake, of course. The subject line was a single, sterile word: results. He clicked it open. The report was a string of genetic markers and statistical probabilities. He scrolled past the jargon, his eyes searching for the one line that mattered. He found it at the bottom of the page, stark and unequivocal. Relationship, parent-child. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The screen blurred. The air left his lungs. It wasn't a theory. It wasn't a suspicion. It was a fact, written in the language of science, undeniable and absolute. Maya was his daughter, Elara's daughter. 1,000 emotions crashed over him at once. Awe, terror, a profound, soul-deep joy, and an ocean of regret. A child. His child had been alive all this time, living a life of struggle just a few miles away while he rotted in his palace of grief. Elara had given him a daughter. It was her last, most precious gift, and he had been completely ignorant of it. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the screen. The sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the room. His world had not just fractured, it had been obliterated, and in its place was this one stunning truth. He was a father. It was in that moment of cataclysmic revelation that the door to his study chimed. He ignored it. A second later, it chimed again, followed by an override code being entered. The door slid open. His sister, Cassandra, stood in the doorway. She was older than him by 10 years, perfectly coiffed and dressed in a severe, expensive suit. Even at this early hour, she ran the Vance Foundation and considered herself the guardian of their family's legacy. "Julian, you missed the pre-market call with Tokyo," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "What on earth is so important that you—" She stopped, her eyes falling on his computer screen, still displaying the DNA report. He hadn't had time to close it. Her gaze flickered from the screen to the doll on his desk, to the stunned, transformed expression on his face. A slow, cold understanding dawned in her eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice losing its business-like clip and taking on a dangerous softness. "What have you done?" Cassandra moved into the room with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood. She walked to his desk, her eyes scanning the paternity report, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the damning percentage. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a new and dangerous energy. The mystery of Maya's existence was being swiftly replaced by the threat of Cassandra's discovery. "A child?" she said, her voice a low murmur. "You have a child? With whom? When?" Julian finally found his voice, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed, rising up to shield his newfound daughter from his sister's cynical gaze. "That is not your concern, Cassandra." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Not my concern? Julian, everything you do is my concern. I have spent the last 5 years safeguarding the Vance name, a name you seem determined to tarnish. A secret, illegitimate child? Do you have any idea what this would do to our stock? To the Foundation's reputation?" "This isn't about stock prices," Julian said, his voice hard as steel. "This is about my daughter." The word felt foreign, and yet perfectly right on his tongue. "Your daughter?" Cassandra sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Or a clever little grifter's meal ticket? Let me guess. It's that woman from the clinic, isn't it? The one you suddenly took such an interest in. I had my own people look into her. Lena Robotics, a nobody with a mountain of debt. It's a classic, pathetic little scam." "Get out, Cassandra," Julian said, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere," she replied smoothly. "I am going to fix this, just like I fix all your messes. I'll have our lawyers draft a settlement, a generous one. The mother signs a non-disclosure agreement. We set up a trust for the child, contingent on them disappearing, and this entire unfortunate incident goes away." The cold, clinical way she spoke of Maya, of Lena, ignited a fire in Julian's chest. This was his sister's way. Every problem could be solved with money and legal threats. She saw people as assets or liabilities, and Maya and Lena were a liability to be neutralized. "You will do no such thing," Julian commanded. "You will not go near them." A sly, calculating look entered Cassandra's eyes. "You're not thinking clearly, little brother. You're sentimental. Grief has made you soft. You can't see the danger here, but I can. And I will protect this family whether you want me to or not." She turned and swept out of the room, leaving a chill in her wake. Julian knew it was not an idle threat. Cassandra was ruthless and efficient. She would not hesitate to destroy Lena's life to achieve her objective. He had to get to them first. He had to tell them the truth. He spent the morning trying to reach Lena, but his calls went straight to voicemail. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. Had Cassandra already made her move? He sent Marcus to their apartment, but he returned an hour later. The apartment was empty. They were gone. Panic began to set in. He put Davies on it immediately, his instructions frantic. "Find them! I don't care what it costs. Find them now." The next 24 hours were the longest of his life. He was no longer just a father who had discovered his child, he was a father who had lost her all over again. The penthouse felt more like a prison than ever, its silent luxury mocking him. He was a king in a tower, powerless to protect the one person who mattered. Davies finally called late the next night. "I found them," the investigator said. "They're not far. Lena has a cousin who lives in a small town about 2 hours north of the city. They're laying low there." Relief washed over Julian, so potent it left him weak. "Send me the address." The drive north was a journey through a landscape that mirrored his own transformation. The gleaming skyscrapers of the city gave way to suburbs, then to rolling farmland and small towns with single traffic lights. It was a world away from his own. When they finally pulled up to the address, a small, tidy house with a porch swing, he saw Maya in the front yard, pushing a toy truck through a patch of dirt. Lena came out onto the porch as his van door slid open and the hydraulic lift lowered him to the ground. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, stepping in front of Maya protectively. "How did you find us?" "I had to see you," Julian said, wheeling himself slowly up the walkway. "Lena, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice trembling. "I got a visit yesterday from a lawyer offering me money, a lot of money, to sign some papers and leave the state. To never say that Maya—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "He said if I didn't, he'd prove I was an unfit mother. He knew about my student loans the time I was late on rent. He was going to take her from me." It was Cassandra's work, swift, cruel, and brutally effective. "That was not me, Lena. I swear to you," Julian said, his voice raw with emotion. "That was my sister. I didn't know until it was too late." He looked past her, at Maya, who was watching them with her wide, serious eyes. He knew he couldn't hide anymore. He had to lay the truth bare, no matter the consequences. "I know, Lena," he said softly. "I know Maya is my daughter." Tears welled in Lena's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. The fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. "I never wanted you to know," she whispered. "I was going to tell her when she was older. I wanted to protect her from all this. From your world. Protect her? By letting her live in poverty while her father—" He stopped, the bitterness of his own words choking him. "She wasn't living in poverty," Lena flared, her pride reasserting itself. "She was loved. She is happy." "What could you have given her, Julian? A big, empty house full of ghosts? You weren't ready. I saw you at that event. You were as broken as that boy's doll on the playground." The mention of the doll stunned him. She knew. "Elora told me about you," Lena continued, her voice softening. "She was my friend. We met at the clinic. She told me how much she loved you, but she also saw how your work consumed you, how you were losing yourself in it. She was scared. When she found out she was pregnant, she was overjoyed, but she was also afraid. Afraid of what this world, your world, would do to a child." The confession was a final, devastating blow. Elora had been pregnant, she had known, and she hadn't told him. "She was going to tell you," Lena said, as if reading his mind. "The night of the accident, she had the sonogram pictures in her purse. She was going to tell you that night. After she was gone, I was her emergency contact. I made a choice. I saw how broken you were by her death. I couldn't put a newborn baby into that grief. So I disappeared. I did what I thought was best for Maya." The story was complete. A tragic tapestry of secrets and misguided protection. He wasn't angry. All the anger had been burned out of him. All that was left was a vast, aching emptiness, and a desperate need to fix what had been broken for so long. He looked at Maya, his daughter. "I know I have no right to ask," he said to Lena, his voice thick with unshed tears. "But please, don't run from me. Let me be her father. Let me be the man Ilara would have wanted me to be." Before Lena could answer, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was Cassandra. He ignored it. It buzzed again, this time with a text. He glanced at it. It was a link to a notorious gossip blog. The headline read, "Billionaire Julian Vance's Secret Love Child. A story of deception and a gold-digging mother." Cassandra hadn't just threatened, she had acted. The war had begun. The storm broke that evening, both outside and in. Rain lashed against the windows of the small house, and thunder cracked overhead, each peal like a judgment. Lena had, with deep reluctance, allowed Julian to stay. They existed in a fragile truce, the unspoken truths of the past hanging heavy in the air between them. Maya, sensing the tension, was quiet, staying close to her mother. Julian's phone was a relentless torrent of alerts. His PR team was in meltdown. His lawyers were demanding instructions. But the only call he took was the one from Cassandra. "It's done," she said, her voice cold and triumphant over the sound of the storm. "The story is out. I've framed it perfectly. A tragic story of a grieving billionaire being taken advantage of by a desperate woman. Public sympathy will be with you. Now all you have to do is play your part." "What part is that, Cassandra?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I've arranged a press conference for tomorrow morning, and I have a meeting scheduled with the board for the Vance Foundation. It's for the final vote on the Apex project, the largest philanthropic medical research initiative in history. It will be our family's legacy, your legacy. You will announce the project, express your sadness and disappointment at this woman's fraudulent claims, and reaffirm your commitment to your work. You will choose your legacy over this mess, and it will all go away." It was the ultimate choice, the culmination of his life's work, a project that would put the Vance name in history books, solidifying the sterile, powerful legacy he had spent years building. All he had to do was sacrifice his daughter. He looked across the small living room. Lena was sitting on the floor with Maya, reading her a story from a worn picture book. The lamplight cast a warm, golden glow on them, an island of peace in the storm. He saw the way Lena's hand rested on Maya's back, the quiet trust in his daughter's eyes as she listened. In that moment the choice was not difficult at all. It was the easiest decision he had ever made. The Apex project, the Vance Foundation, the stock price, the entire glittering empire, it was all dust. It was meaningless. His legacy wasn't a building with his name on it. It was right here in this room. It was a little girl with her mother's eyes. "No," Julian said into the phone. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What did you say?" "I said no, Cassandra," he repeated, a lifetime of suppressed emotion finally finding its voice. "There will be no press conference. And you can take the Apex project and your legacy, and you can burn them. They mean nothing to me." "Julian, have you lost your mind?" she shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "I am trying to save you." "You're not saving me. You're trying to save a version of me that died 5 years ago in a car wreck. I'm done living as a ghost. My daughter is not a mess. She is the only thing that matters. You have threatened her. You have threatened her mother. You have declared war on my family, and you have lost." He spoke with a clarity and power that surprised even himself. His mind, the one asset he had left, was now deployed not for profit, but for protection. "My legal team is already drafting the paperwork to have you removed from the board of the foundation and from any position of authority within Vance Enterprises. I am cutting you out, Cassandra, completely. If you ever contact me or them again, I will use the full weight of my resources to ruin you. Am I clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the couch. A profound silence settled over him. It was the silence of a battle finally won. He wheeled himself over to where Lena and Maya were sitting. Lena looked up, her eyes searching his face. She had heard everything. "I am so sorry, Lena," he said, his voice quiet. "For everything. For the man I was. For the years I lost. For what my family has put you through. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance. To be a father to our daughter. To build something real." Lena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Maya, who had put her book down and was staring at Julian with an unnerving intensity. Maya reached out and placed her small hand on his knee, on his leg that could not feel. "It's okay," she said softly. "The sickness is going away now. I can tell." Tears streamed down Julian's face, hot and cleansing. They were not tears of grief, but of release, of a profound, earth-shattering catharsis. Lena's hand came to rest on his shoulder, and in that small, simple room, as the storm raged outside, a family was born, not from a legal document or a shared name, but from a shared hope. The cure hadn't been for his legs, it had been for his soul, and it had been delivered by a 5-year-old girl in a faded pink jacket. 1 year later. The 100th floor penthouse was unrecognizable. The cold, minimalist furniture had been replaced with comfortable sofas. The obsidian desk was gone, its place taken by a low table covered in Lego creations and scattered crayons. A child's vibrant, chaotic artwork was taped to the wall that had once held a cold, abstract painting. The panes of glass that had once been a barrier were now just windows, letting in the warm afternoon sun. Julian sat near the window, not staring out at the city as a distant observer, but helping Maya finish a complex jigsaw puzzle on a specially designed, accessible table. He was still in his chair, but the chair no longer defined him. It was simply a part of him, like the color of his eyes. His face, once a mask of bitter resignation, was relaxed and open, etched with the lines of frequent laughter. The gossip storm had been fierce, but Julian had weathered it with a quiet dignity he hadn't known he possessed. He issued a single, simple statement confirming Maya was his daughter and requesting privacy. He poured his resources not into a monolithic foundation, but into smaller, targeted community projects, starting with a complete overhaul of the clinic where Ilara had volunteered and Lena had found friendship. Lena entered the room, carrying a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade. She had gone back to school, studying to become a registered nurse, her tuition paid for by a man who now considered it the best investment he had ever made. She set the tray down and ruffled Maya's hair, her eyes meeting Julian's over their daughter's head. The look that passed between them was one of deep, quiet affection and partnership. There were no grand declarations of romance, but there was love. A steady, resilient love built on a foundation of forgiveness and shared devotion to their child. "Look, Daddy, we finished the corner," Maya exclaimed, slotting a piece into place with a triumphant tap. "You did it, superstar," Julian said, his voice filled with a warmth that would have been unimaginable a year ago. He looked from his daughter's beaming face to Lena's gentle smile. He saw Ilara in Maya's eyes, but he no longer saw a ghost. He saw a continuation, a promise. He had once believed his life was measured in panes of glass that kept the world out. He now knew it was measured in these moments, the satisfying click of a puzzle piece, the sweet taste of lemonade, the feeling of his daughter's small hand in his. He had been offered a trade, leftovers for a cure. He had laughed, but the little girl had been right all along. He had given her a life of comfort and security, and in return she had given him back his own. She had cured the sad sickness, the sickness you couldn't see, and filled his big, quiet house with the noise it so desperately needed, and it was the sound of home.